Welcome to Heart with Keisha B, the podcast that focuses on the journey of grief, healing, and overcoming unforeseen circumstances. Whether you're dealing with loss or life challenges, this is a podcast that you don't want to miss. I am your host, Keisha B. So take a deep breath, open your mind and your soul, and sit back as we embark on this journey together. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Heart with Keisha B. As you all know, we are moving and shaking on this podcast this week. And this week, we're going to talk about what it's like to deal with grief, healing, and overcoming unforeseen circumstances. This week's episode is going to focus on a divorced dad's fight for healing and fatherhood. Jeff, how are you doing today?
Fantastic. How are you, Keisha?
I am well. More importantly, thank you for coming today to be able to share your story, your life, and your gift of inspiration. This podcast is all about bringing people forth to you that will be able to inspire you in so many different ways that when you finish listening to this podcast, you're going to think, man, I needed that today. Let's talk about who you are and what brought you here today.
My name's Jeff. I'm a divorce recovery coach. The men I tend to work with are 6 months to 18 months out of a divorce. And maybe they're sitting there on the couch. They're wondering, what happened? What am I doing next? They're afraid of repeating the same mistakes. And maybe they're even noticing that they're making the same mistakes that led up to their divorce. The work I do is around letting go of those patterns and building a better life than they had before. So about 12, 13 years ago, I went through an absolutely miserable separation and then divorce. And at this point, it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Wow.
So I want other fathers, well, everybody, but I'm specifically helping fathers to have that same experience.
And Jeff, I applaud you for being able to be vulnerable in this type of setting, right? One, for many different reasons, because stereotypically, right? And I use the word stereotypically, it's not very common for divorced fathers to come out and talk about their feelings of how a divorce really in some capacity affected them. It's not because they don't want to. Sometimes society don't think that it's possible.
I don't think we have the language to speak about it. I don't think we're taught that language. I was listening to something by Brene Brown that says in order for us to be emotionally fluent, we need to be able to name 30 emotions and name what that feels like. And she says that most of us can only name about five or fewer. I don't even think I had that fluency when I went through my divorce. I think I knew anger and fear. And I didn't even know what their names were. It was just run away from this, run away from that, or go towards this. And I think when you go through a divorce, I think men are taught to take action. And we're taught that our value comes from what we can provide and what we can do. And we're very logical. And we push down those emotions to go into the burning building to save the kids, or, push down our emotions to defend the village. But when we go through a divorce, it's almost purely emotional. But in my case, what happened is my ex hired the most evil lawyer in the world. She would just constantly push my buttons, emotional buttons. I didn't know how to handle that. I didn't understand what was going on, and I didn't know how to get out of that trap. The reason that's important is because when she pushes your buttons, you react. They always get the reaction. If you watch sports, they always get the retaliation penalty. They don't get the guy antagonizing the other guy. They get the retaliation to that. Same thing with a divorce. They get the retaliation. So if you can learn to become non-reactive, but to do that, you have to process your emotions. You have to be okay with what's going on. You have to be able to name, this is anger, this is jealousy, this is fear, this is, grief. And when you can do that, the next level down below that is, why am I having this emotion? How do I let it go? So that was kind of my journey. And, I'm not 100% successful at it. I don't think anybody ever gets to that point. But I've gotten to a place where I'm pretty good at letting go of those difficult emotions.
So take us back to the early days of your divorce. How did you process all these emotions of Jeff's divorce? What did it feel like? What did it look like? How did you adjust to all of it?
I remember having the conversation. My ex did something that meant the end of our relationship. And I remember that conversation, and I went and I was happy. It was the very first feeling. I was like, thank God I don't have to, I can leave this and with a clear conscience. But then it was a lot of fear
Mm-hmm.
and uncertainty and then anger. Like I talked
Yeah.
about, it became very litigious very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about, I want all of this. And I was very fearful about what would happen. I think I had this vision in my mind of just becoming one of those fathers who was basically an ATM, saw his kids every other weekend and that was it. I wanted to be involved with my kids.
Right.
So I felt like I had to fight that. And when you get into that, there's a lot of I had a lot of anger. I dealt with a lot of like anger, and it was either anger or depression. Either I didn't sleep or I wanted to sleep all the time. There was
Yeah.
no like happy medium between those two places.
Mm-hmm.
I was either manic or feeling down all the time. So I tried to short circuit that process. Like early on, that's what it was. I was alone. I
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden I had lost my family, and I realized that the last year of my marriage had been hell, and it was time to do something for myself. So I started dating again. And then I picked a new house that was way more exciting. I lived downtown Toronto, like right downtown, where all the parties are. I was in my mid 30s. I was making good money. So, I went out and had some fun. And then I took 6 months to myself and went and did some traveling. I was with somebody new and we
Mm-hmm.
both wanted to travel. So I started putting myself first and I
Okay.
started living for myself. And then after that, I came back and set myself a goal that I was going to buy a house within a year. So I needed to
Mm-hmm.
save up a down payment. I needed to pay off my debt. I went and did that. So it was a lot of determination. I remember the first time I got served paperwork and I was like, this thing is not going to beat me. Like there was this strong determination that I was going to win. Whatever that looked like, I was going to win. So I got fired up and I got determined to build a better life than I had in my marriage. And I did.
Mm-hmm. What I hear is that I'm going to win this battle. No matter how much hell someone's trying to put me through, I am determined that it's not going to get the best of me, even though it sounds like early on, right before you was able to say, wait a minute, this ain't it. It was trying to get the best of you. You were angry, you were depressed. One of the things, Jeff, I often talk about is you talk about determination. And I often tell people that many times as humans, we get so caught up on our biological DNA. But I share with people about the internal DNA that we have, determination and ambition. So it sounds like to me that you really hung tight on your own DNA, your reason to persevere through whatever it is that you may have been going through to get you to the next stage that you moved on into your life.
Yeah, I had a moment of this is not what's going to kill me. And I don't mean physically kill me, like kill my soul, like deeper than that. Determination is one of the three things it takes to really change your life: courage, curiosity, and determination. And there were times I learned to tap into that anger because that's what's going to prompt you to make changes, especially in the early days. You don't like your situation, get angry at it, and then start making changes. Now, anger specifically is a tough emotion. It's expensive. It takes a lot of energy and it can overflow onto the people you care about. So you have to be really careful with it. But it is a great fuel for when you're in a tough situation. It gets you really moving.
So how was you able to balance not allowing the anger to pour over into other folks who cared about you, whether it was your children, whether it was your partner that you said that you got into another relationship? How did you manage not allowing your anger to pour over into someone else?
There were times I did not. And that was, and I feel bad for that. I still have moments to this day where I'm like, oh my God, did I really say that? Did I act like that? But I think what that does today is a guideline to not act in that way again. It's a lesson. It's not who you are. The way out of anger for me was I felt like a victim. And the more responsibility I could take for my situation, the less anger I felt. I started to just believe that everything that led me to that moment was my fault. Maybe fault is too strong of a word, but was my responsibility.
Okay.
So whatever the divorce, whatever my ex did, doesn't matter. How am I going to not repeat that and then do that work? On a day-to-day basis, how did I not allow anger to spill over? There were many times I failed, like I said. What helped me was, it sounds so simple, but going outside, going for walks, and going to the gym.
Mm-hmm.
And I only discovered boxing in the last couple of years. I wish I had that when I was younger. So good to punch.
Mm-hmm.
And now when I get angry, I like going to the gym and just imagining I'm angry at the punching bag and I just beat the crap out of it. I used to play squash when I was going through the divorce at the worst point, and I would imagine my ex's face or her lawyer on the squash ball, and I would just hammer it.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to get the emotions get stored in the body. You got to let them out.
Right.
And movement is so important for that.
So it sounded like you were finding ways to take your power back.
The more you can take your power back, the less you will feel like a victim and the less angry you will feel, the more in control you will feel.
So let's circle back for a second. You had said that a lot of times your anger got the best of you and you sort of took it out on the other people.
Yeah.
How did the other people respond to that?
My partner, she responded with a lot of grace, thankfully. There were times where she got angry back, and probably rightfully so. But there were other times where she went, you've got some work to do. And you need that. I screwed up with my kids a few times. They're just, the look on their faces was enough. And I don't want to go back to that ever again. I remember we went for a drive once after we split up, and my oldest said, "Isn't it great how there's no more arguing in the house?" And my heart just dropped.
Of course. Of course.
I didn't realize how much he heard. And I feel bad for that. I didn't know what else to do in that moment. I just said, it's not your fault.
Right.
It's nothing you guys did.
Right. And I think it's fair to say, Jeff, that so many kids are probably walking around with that same feeling on the inside, but just don't know how to let it out or don't know who to talk to. Right. Because many times they're just kids in a home, just trying to be kids.
But he had trouble. He almost had panic attacks, like trouble sleeping for a couple of years after we split up.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know how to handle it. It worried me that that's what he was going to carry through with him for the rest of his life. He hasn't, luckily. He doesn't do that anymore. So I don't know. We did something right.
Yeah. So was there ever a time through the upbringing of your children after the divorce that you just sat down to talk with them about the effects that the divorce may have even had on them?
Not that explicitly, no.
Okay.
I don't know that would have made sense given the dynamic. I did take them to the coach I was seeing. She was good at helping to navigate emotions. So we did that, and we worked through a lot of the issues. And I think it was after that my oldest stopped having those panic attacks.
As we are diving into what life looked like for you as you were going through your divorce and post thereafter, what strategies or resources did you use in order to manage your mental health and maintain your connection with your children?
I prioritized the connection with my children. One thing I remember reading around that time was the 5 regrets of the dying. I've been to a seminar where they mentioned that, and it's overwhelmingly that list of 5 things is about connection. The divorce was more about maintaining that relationship, and it became less about the things I lost because of the relationship. So there's something in divorce called a silver bullet technique. And what that is one party accuses the other party of abuse in order to get money and the house. And that was such a deflating thing to go through over some money. My character was attacked. My ex called my friends. She called my parents to tell them I was abusive and I was using drugs and this and that. So it was like character assassination. And I worried what she was going to tell the kids. Of course, the court process didn't believe me. So I felt like I had to be extraordinary to have a connection to my kids. So I went and really reflected on what mattered. Maintaining a relationship was the most important thing. A friend gave me some advice, and it was, when you have kids, throw them into everything, and whatever sticks, really throw them into it. Like, go whole hog with it. So with my kids, in order to build a relationship, in order to build that connection, I put them into hockey. And that's just the Canadian thing. Every parent their kids into hockey. Hockey was just representative of setting goals and then going for that. So at the beginning of every year, I would have them set a goal, and they would have goals like, I want to save $500 to buy a phone, and I want to make the rep hockey team. I don't know what you guys call it in competitive hockey, but like whatever the next level is. They had that goal throughout the year, and it was a big goal, and that's what they would work towards. My youngest, he wasn't super into hockey. I don't care. Doesn't matter. He's more of an arty kid. He's teaching himself character study now, which is
Okay.
kind of cool. He taught himself to program. He's teaching himself to draw. He's showing me pictures of skeletons, and it's like a little macabre, but it's kind of cool. My oldest liked the competitiveness of sports. He liked soccer and he liked hockey, and he went from house league, which is the bottom rung, to AA in 3 years, which is pretty cool because you level up every year. But it showed what he has to have to be really successful in life. And I'm mentioning him more because he's a little bit older and he's doing more adult things, whereas my younger is still he's still in high school. My oldest is in university taking nuclear engineering, and we're opening an investment account for him, and he wants to be a millionaire by the time he's 30, whatever it is.
That's impressive. I have a son who wants to be a nuclear engineer as well.
That's cool. But what that did is we found a connection through setting those big goals, because I would go to their hockey games and it would be like, hey, you got a tripping penalty. Or my oldest was a goalie. Hey, you got a shutout. It was cool to see that competitive fire in them. And I never had a problem with connection because I was pushing them to do their best. I talked about after I split up, I wasn't going to let this thing beat me. And I set a goal for myself to buy a house within a year after splitting up, and I did. But it was that action of helping myself get to a place where I was able to set that goal and to build it myself. I would set my own big goals, and then as that worked, I would pass that down to my kids. So what I realized here is put your own oxygen mask on first. Help yourself first. Get to a place where you're centered, where you are improving yourself, and then help your kids to level up. I'm always trying to be about 10 steps in front of them. I remember sitting my oldest down one day, and I said that it was a humbling day when you exceed your father. Then I told him I was going to make it as difficult as possible for him to exceed me. And he's a competitive kid, so he really liked that. So we have that friendly competitiveness. What that does is that takes care of both of those issues. It takes care of my mental health because I'm not focused on this thing. What I believe is if you plant more flowers, there's no room for weeds to grow.
I like that. That's a heart-to-heart moment.
So focus on building cool stuff. Like go take action. Go set giant goals and then go achieve them or fail. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you succeed or fail. You're going to succeed either way.
Right.
But you go and do that thing, plant those flowers, and then your kids look up to you. Your kids want to see their dad as a superhero. And one of the things I tell fathers who don't see their kids all that often is, I hear you, but what are you going to do about it? You go level yourself up, focus on yourself, go live a huge life, and then share that with your kids when you see them. And if I can give you another piece of strategy here for that is if you don't see your kids all that often, if you have been limited to seeing your kids, once or twice a month, record them a video every day and just keep it until they turn 18 and then give them the access to it. But what that does gives you that connection to them. So what I wish I knew back then is I think I was focused on my ex and what my ex was taking away from me. The real answer and saving your own sanity and your mental health is to focus on yourself. How do you improve yourself? Forget her. She doesn't matter.
Sometimes that can be pretty challenging too, wouldn't you say?
100%. 100% it's challenging. Yeah. None of what I'm saying is easy. That's why you need a coach.
Yeah.
But put her aside. She doesn't matter now. 70% of divorces are initiated by the woman. So that's not to say one gender is worse than the other. I'm not saying that. It's just for the fathers. She probably made the decision to leave the marriage. So focus on yourself. Get to work. Go make that better life. Go get fired up. At first, you might be living for your kids. You don't want them to go through this same process. How do you level yourself up so that you show them how not to do this? Who do you have to become to live that life that you're dreaming of? How do you do that? How do you get there?
So just let me ask you a question. If I was a father, right, and I'm in a coaching session with you and you give me that advice, what next advice would you give me? What steps can I take to begin to level up?
Couple things, two things that are low-hanging fruit. Number one, I already kind of alluded to this. You need rituals every day. And these rituals are going to sound so simple, but 99% of men don't do this. Movement. Get out there and move. Go lift some weights. Go lift something heavy. Go punch something. Go hit a squash ball. Doesn't matter what it is. Every single day, go do something. Go move. Number two, go spend some time in nature. It has this grounding effect. Yes, this sounds a little woo-woo. I don't care. Go do it. Can't be outside and be in a bad mood. Number three, some sort of presence activity. The idea here is to get into the present moment. So boxing is a good one because there's no way you can be thinking about your ex when somebody's trying to punch you in the face.
Right.
Meditation is good. That's what I do. I've got a meditation cave I run once every week on Sundays. Slight plug there. Free. That works for me. That doesn't work for everybody. Just something that gets you into this present moment. The past is over with. The future hasn't happened yet. And this is, again, this is very hard to realize, but get into the present moment. So look for something that gets you into now. Have a conversation on a podcast, whatever it is that brings you into this present moment, that you're not worried about what's happening next week, that you're not worried about what the lawyer is going to say to you tomorrow.
Right.
So that's one. Number two is when I have a new client, we look at the 8 areas of life. 8 areas of life are mental, spiritual, physical, family, career, environment, and finance. Something is likely out of balance in that. What you need to do is bring your attention to that thing and bring that all up to balance. What I believe is that divorce is what I call the baseball bat. Life has a way of bringing your attention to what is out of balance in your life. So if you've spent too much time on your career, you've been neglecting your marriage, guess what? You're probably going to get divorced. That's life's way of saying, maybe bring down your attention to your career and bring it to relationships. So what we do is we look at those 8 areas of life, and if something gets out of whack, like envision a wheel, but if the wheel isn't round, it's going to cause a problem. So one of the things I do is try to bring that back. I guide the person into bringing that wheel back into alignment.
The reason I'm asking that is because so many fathers and mothers, right, that are going through divorce, and what you said was perfect, right? Oftentimes, the individuals that are going through the relationship issues, we tend to sometimes focus on the past. And as you know, and as I know, especially as coaches, I'm a life coach myself, is that we have to learn how to move forward. Sometimes that's tricky. It doesn't mean that you're forgetting about what took place. It just means that you're not going to allow what took place to continue to have so much control of your life that you don't develop a new way of living.
Agreed. One thing I would say to that, though, is I believe that difficult situations help you develop wisdom.
For sure.
So I now look for difficult situations so that I can develop wisdom. So I put myself deliberately into challenging situations because I want to grow as much wisdom as possible. And think of a yin and yang. And I know I'm getting a little woo-woo here again.
You're fine.
A yin and yang has equal parts white and black. There's a lot of wisdom in that. When you see something as having more light, meaning more good than bad, or more bad than good, then that's when you have an emotion. That's when you see something, you're resentful for something if you see more negative than positive, and you are infatuated with something if you see more positive than negative.
Right.
The balance, I call it love, is when you can see that equal amount of positive and negative. So the goal is to learn to love their divorce. And that is such a hard thing to do. What positive is your divorce bringing you? In my case, it brought a lot more confidence. It brought a lot more patience and emotional awareness for me. But that's not going to be true for everybody. What is the nugget in there for you? Learn to love your divorce, learn to see that balance. And that's what's going to set you free from that pain that you're feeling every day.
It's like what I hear you saying is like tapping into your inner self. Everybody's inner self may be different, but it's tapping into that, gravitating towards that, and appreciating that inner self of you.
100%. Yeah. Do the inner work that gets you to the place where you can learn to see that balance. That's how I see it.
Being able to look at yourself in the mirror and be okay.
Yeah.
For who you see yourself as at that moment.
When you get to that place, it helps you navigate those difficult situations, because you know, if you go through a challenge, you are going to get an equal amount of support. I didn't used to be religious. I didn't used to be spiritual, but I have seen that balance so much that I have a hard time not believing in a higher power. That is where I draw my strength from these days, is seeing that balance. It's very humbling.
Sure.
And I've had moments where, you're just very grateful to be there because you see that balance. I had a tough divorce. I was, like we said earlier, I got my character assassinated. I got my house taken away. I had to pay child support. I didn't see my kids all that often. I didn't do anything. That's how I saw it when I was going through it. I like, what's happening here? That was a hard time in my life. But now, if you told me 10 years ago where I was now, I got a great relationship with my kids. I've been rich. I've been poor. I've traveled the world. I'm somewhere in between rich and poor at this point, but I've had some pretty incredible experiences. And it's because of that divorce. I learned to love my divorce, and that's what set me free.
Yeah. What I hear you saying is very similar to how I live my life today. Even though there was something that happened, you're able to see the good in it because of who you are today. What you went through, it sounds like, is what led you to being Jeff today.
Yeah.
And I sort of take this back, even though what I'm about to say is not a divorce, but when I lost my son 3 years ago, losing him is the worst thing a mother can go through. But I say quite often, I had to preference this when I say this to people because they look at me like I'm crazy. It may have been the best thing that happened to me because it allowed me to look at life differently. It allowed me to go internally and heal over some other things I had dealt with throughout my life, from losing parents, going through my own divorce, right? Again, I say that for our listeners to understand. I'm not saying that losing my son is a happy moment, but it allowed me to have a new life. It allowed me to see a new Keisha and appreciate the Keisha who's here today, because I'm seeing myself heal and I'm seeing myself continue to grow and be an inspiration to other people out there who are just trying to figure out, how are you doing these things? Knowing that you went through probably one of the most worst times of your life.
And it's not about spiritual bypass. Like, you still have to feel. You still have to go through those emotions. You still have to experience that grief.
Yes. And that shit hurts sometimes, Jeff.
I know.
If we can be very candid, that shit hurts sometimes.
I know.
Yeah. And
I avoided it at times. There were times I avoided it. Alcohol, partying, worse. But that doesn't get you anywhere in the long run.
It's like a Band-Aid.
A terrible Band-Aid.
Yes.
And you have to face it. You have to allow it to change you. Because if you resist it, you repeat that lesson until you learn it. It's just going to happen over and over again. Maybe not the same thing, but you are going to, unless you allow it to change you, you're going to experience it over and over and over.
Yeah. And it just makes the pain even worse.
Yep.
But Jeff, you touched on something I want to go back to when you talked about your character, that all of these different descriptive things were said about you to your family, to your friends. How did you repair those things when it came to people? Because I'm not sure, we didn't go into that really, if people really believe those things that were being said. But if they did, how were you able to go back and grab Jeff back and let people know this is the Jeff? This is who I am and not who someone has tried to paint me out to be.
I don't know that I did in some cases. If somebody wanted to believe my ex, okay. And it's unfortunate. I can think of 2 friends from university who did believe what she said. I went over, it was weird. I went over to one of my friend's houses, and his wife was so incredibly cold to me, and I couldn't figure out why. I found out later, my ex, she bragged to me. She bragged. She said, I called all of your friends to tell them to put you back into your place. And I called your parents and told them you were smoking weed. And she was bragging in that moment. But I made that decision that, if you're going to believe her, if you're going to pick sides, I don't want you in my life. So are you going to believe my ex, or are you going to believe who you see? Luckily my partner, she didn't believe my ex. And we've been together since. To answer your question, I think you have to be aware of what's going on, and you have to hold those relationships lightly, so that if they want to leave, if they don't want to be friends anymore, okay. And you put that value somewhere else. I put it into my kids. I put it into the people who stuck with me.
Almost like I'm not gonna cry over spilled milk. Like it is what it is, right?
It is
If
what
this
it
is
is.
if this is what it's gonna be, this is what it's gonna be. But I can't allow this also to have some type of negative impact on my mental health or my life.
You still go through it. You still grieve those relationships. Every once in a while, one of them was a friendship that was, what was it, like 15 years? I had been friends with him since university. And every once in a while, I have like this, I can't believe he doesn't want, like, he just dropped me like that. He didn't even ask my side of it. He just,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want you anymore. Um, it broke my heart at the time, and you just got to let it go.
Yeah. Jeff, you brought up something that I think, even when we look at grief, right, of a sense of loneliness, right? Like what I heard you say is that there was a moment of your life that you were just lonely.
I moved into, my parents were out of the country at the time, and I moved into their house. They had a big house in the country, and I split up in the winter. And in Canada, it gets really dark really early. And I was in a house in the middle of nowhere where there was nobody around. And that was very, very, very lonely.
Mm-hmm.
I think I used a crutch of dating to not feel lonely. But I don't know that I was in a great place mentally to have a proper relationship. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it turned into a relationship after a while, but I think I was coming from a place of, like you said, grief and loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there was more than once I drank, and I just I learned to feel what that loneliness felt like. I learned to be okay being lonely and not having people around.
Mm-hmm.
That was hard because it was like the events that led to that moment kept playing in my head over and over again. But like I said, I got angry and I got out of that. And that's shortly after that is when I moved to downtown Toronto. And then I wasn't I wasn't lonely again.
Yeah.
There was always something going on there. But that was another form of distraction. Yeah, I think I distracted myself a lot in those days.
Yeah. So, Jeff, one of the questions I want to ask you as we are getting closer to the end of the segment is what message would you share with other fathers who are going through what Jeff went through and having children also?
I think I touched on this already, but I think this is a good place for it. Become their superhero. Go become larger than life. Go become the man, because you are. There's just, something that's covering it up. Go clear that out. Go do what it takes. Whatever it takes, become the man. You are incredibly important to your raising your kids. Fathers being in their kids' lives are so important. I've got a few stats here. Boys with absent fathers are 5 times more likely to be incarcerated. Fathers who are involved with their kids are 98% more likely to graduate high school, 75% less likely to become pregnant, 42%. Like, these are just stats. Like, it's stat after stat after stat. Being involved in your kids' lives is so important.
Yes.
So if your ex is pushing you out of your kids' lives, focus on what's important. What's important is the kids. Do your best. If you're only seeing your kids once a month, once every 2 weeks, whatever it is, be a superhero to them. Go spend the rest of the time leveling yourself up. Somebody asked me, what do I say to the father who's struggling to pay the bills? There was a point of this where I worked 3 jobs. I was working like 16 to 20 hours a day to pay legal bills, to buy a house, and pay child support. Like, I was fighting this fight with one arm tied behind my back. I did what it took to dig myself out of that. If you are struggling to pay your bills, do what it takes to get out of that, because you're not just doing that for yourself, you're doing that for your kids.
Powerful, very powerful.
And yeah, you don't have to be around every day to have an impact. Go out, live some incredible stories, and bring it back and tell your kids the next time you see them.
Yeah. Jeff, I sit here, and as I said early on, I sit here as a woman who's divorced and who raised 2 children as a single mother. I have 3, but I have 2 children by my ex-husband. And I wish I had you in my life as I was raising my children. I wish that their father had you in their life when we were raising our children, because so many different things that I have heard you share today, man, I'm being very forthcoming. I wish I had it then, because some of the statistics that you wrote off, I see it, right? How it affects your mental health, or how it affects a kid's mental health, just not to have that peace in their life. And I know that we're speaking of fathers, but I also want to sort of tie this into the importance of just being able to co-parent, if that's possible, right? Just being able for your kids to see the opportunity, if possible, for the parents to co-parent, because I think sometimes that also can help in regards to their growth of moving into their adulthood. And I know, again, Jeff, that you focus on being a life coach for fathers who are being divorced. But if you were able to go back, and if you and your ex-wife had a great relationship, even though divorce may have been the outcome, what would you say to that father who may have the opportunity to co-parent raising their children?
Be involved as much as you can. Like,
Mm-hmm.
these are your kids. You're building the next level of society. You're building the next generation. That's such an important role. It doesn't matter what happens. It's how you react to it. So whatever your ex does, ask yourself, how did you get to this place? And don't let that happen again.
All right, Jeff. So again, we want to thank you today for being on Heart to Heart with Keisha B. But before we close out, why don't you tell everyone where they can find you at?
I have all my links at divorce-daddy.com, and I've got some videos coming out soon that will talk about how to navigate difficult situations with your ex. We kind of touched on some of it. Things like learning to gray rock, how to take full responsibility for wherever you've been in life, things like that. Thanks for having me, Keisha.
You're welcome. Thank you for tuning in to Heart with Keisha B. Remember, grief may shape our journey, but it doesn't define who we are. Healing is not a straight path, but with every step forward, you're creating space for hope, strength, and new beginnings. If today's episode brought you comfort or clarity, share it with someone who might need it too. Let's continue building this community of compassion and resilience together. Until next time, take care of your heart, your mind, and your soul. Honor your journey, and always know that brighter days are ahead. I am Keisha B, and this has been Heart to Heart.